Prior to UFC 285, there was high percentage of people that would argue that Ciryl Gane was the future of heavyweight. Then overnight, everything changed for the Frenchman. But on the flip side of this coin, there's guys like Leon Edwards, who was dismissed as a serious contender by many. MMA fans are quick to build a narrative around a fighter based off their performances and personalities. That's why we're always so shocked whenever a single fight completely changes the way we look at a fighter. What's going on, guys? I'm Kevin from the MMA Code, and today we'll be discussing the top 5 fights that completely change for the good or the bad of fighters. But before we get into that, please make sure to check out the podcast and subscribe to all the socials. I also want to mention, keep in mind, these aren't in any particular order, and this list is completely subjective, just like 99% of MMA topics. Number 5, Leon Edwards vs. Kamaru Usman 2 and 3. To start off this list, it's honestly crazy the love that Leon Edwards has gotten over the past months since he's won that belt. The narrative leading to UFC 278 was that Usman was going to finally break Anderson Silva's 16-fight win streak in the UFC, or well, at least tie it. Leon, after his performance with Nate Diaz, in which he nearly got finished, was at an all-time low in the eyes of the fans. He had gotten some love back after Jorge pulled out of the fight, but the main things you'd hear when you're bringing up Leon Edwards was that he was boring, he was lame, and he couldn't handle Usman's wrestling. However, Rocky shattered the narrative in a now historic moment when he landed one of the cleanest head kicks of all time on the pound-for-pound number 1. He then will repeat this win, by this time a 49-46 in the trilogy, truly leaving no doubt of who was the better fighter. Since then, the narrative of Leon Edwards did a full 360. Everyone praises him, loves him, and even though there's still some haters out there, you just hear headshot dead in the comments. Number 4, Ciryl Gane vs. Jon Jones. Alright, now hear me out on this one. As a lot of people would argue that Gane lost all his hype after the Francis fight, and even though that's partially true, everyone still had high hopes for him in the future. He was the first man to take Francis to the judges, and if it wasn't for a failed heel hook attempt on round 5, he would have been the champion. Regardless, all of the narrative of Gane going into this fight was that he was the future of heavyweight, with Francis now well out of the sight, having just left the UFC, being praised as one of the best skilled UFC heavyweights after only 10 fights in the UFC, having some of the cleanest striking at heavyweight. However, on the night of UFC 285, despite it being against the greatest fighter of all time, Gane's loss would see his stock drop to an all-time low, as his performance against Gane was simply horrible. We'd all expected Jones' grappling to be a factor in this fight, especially seeing how Francis vs. Gane went. However, Francis' wrestling was unexpected. He's also the biggest human on the planet. What we did not expect was Gane's grappling defense to be this bad. After getting submitted in the first round, the narrative changed from him being the future of the UFC to people saying if he doesn't develop grappling, he'll never be a champ. He has a fight against Spivak coming up, so let's hope for the best for the Frenchman. Number 3, Aljamain Sterling vs. Peter Yan 2. The hate Aljo was receiving after his first clash with Peter at UFC 259, after winning by a DQ due to Peter Yan throwing an illegal knee, keep in mind this was Peter's fault, was insane. I cannot stress that enough. This might have been one of the worst hate cases we've seen. People coming for Aljo's family, and whenever Aljo's name was brought up anywhere, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, everywhere, the comments was absolutely shattered by clown emojis. People would have notifications on just to hate on him. I seen he made a post 3 minutes ago, and the comment section was filled with clown comments from 2 minutes ago. Aljo had it bad. Aljo didn't make it easier for his fans either by pulling out of his rematch 6 months later against Peter. Peter, after beating Corey and being the interim champ, Aljo had no other choice but to fight Yan again, and the hate was at an all-time highest. Everyone calling Aljo the paper champ and Yan the real champ. This was one of the only times that I can recall an interim champ being called the real champ, except for probably Tony and Robert. Once UFC 273 was said and done, Aljo had done the impossible. Despite it being a controversial decision, it didn't matter, because at the end of the day, Aljo was still the champion and proved everyone wrong, proving that the last fight was a bad night and he is the real champion. He'd also then go on to have the longest win streak in bantamweight history and a champion with 4 title defenses. Meanwhile, Yan is 1-4 in his last 5, so that's kind of a crazy career trajectory from these two. Number 2, Paddy Pimblett vs. Jared Gordon. Paddy the Baddy took the UFC by storm when he signed his UFC contract. He came from Cage Warriors as their champion. He had the whole UK scene waiting on his debut. When it finally happened, he capitalized on all the hype, going on a 3-fight win streak, finishing everyone in his streak. And even though some people were already seeing signs of the lack of defense in his striking, Everyone else dismissed it as his grappling made up for it. Some people even go as far as calling him the next Conor McGregor. However, this entire narrative was put in question the moment UFC 282 fight week started, as Patty will get into a whole beef with Ariel Helwani that to this day I don't fully understand where he came from. What I do know is that Ariel will drop a now famous clip taking shots at the baddie, with a lot of people siding with Ariel. Now Patty had a huge pressure to win this fight because in the world of MMA, you can be a terrorist, but as long as you can fight, it'll all blow over. This was not the case though, and Patty will go on to have one of his worst performances, and to top it off, a highly controversial decision that all but one of the media outlets scored for Gordon. Oh, and that's not all. Patty would make everything a lot way worse by being ignorant and acting as if he dominated the fight. Patty had done it. He successfully destroyed his entire career without even losing, just by being delusional. Number 1, Michael Bisping versus Luke Rockhold 2. Throughout his career, Michael Bisping was never known as champion caliber fighter. Everyone simply labeled the UK standout as a gatekeeper, having lost multiple times on fights that could have meant title contention for the count. Most people counted him out when it meant to bringing the belt back to England. But when Chris Weidman pulled out of his fight against Luke Rockhold in a panic move, the UFC offered Bisping a short notice title fight against the man who had previously beaten him. Bisping was quick to say yes. However, everyone quickly dismissed Bisping's chances, as they didn't think that he was able to beat Luke Rockhold. Having lost to him before and not really being worthy of the title shot to begin with, Bisping against all odds would knock out Luke Rockhold with a now famous left hook, becoming the first English champion. Immediately, everyone praised him. Everyone loved Bisping, doing the unthinkable. He would then go on to defend in an all-time war against Hendo, avenging another one of his losses. Then he would go on to have another war with one of the GOAT, the Canadian GOAT, GSP, and then he'd go on and call it quits. Let's not talk about Kelvin. Thanks to everyone who made it to the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed today's list. Like I mentioned earlier, make sure you guys check out the MMA Codes podcast and sub to the channel. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.